Hi everybody, this is Laura. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I have a layout that I made using the Shimmerz February Color Kitz collection. In my mind, I had an idea of having a stencil along with some sprays that I would apply in an ombre using some texture paste. I have a little bit of Finnabair modeling paste left, and then I realized I had some Ranger texture paste, which I hadn't used before, and I really like it. It's a little translucent, so I mixed the texture paste along with what I had left of the modeling paste, and now I'm going to use a number of different Shimmerz colors, going from light to dark pink, and I'm also going to be making a diagonal going from the upper right-hand corner to the lower left-hand corner. I started off with a Vibez called Think Pink, and then I began adding other colors into the texture paste. I used some Spritz in Cotton Candy and Taffy Hour, and also a Coloringz called a Bright Fuchsia. That is a really beautiful bright pink color. Since my goal was to have a progression from light to dark, I continued adding the sprays to the texture paste to make it gradually darker and darker as I move down the page. I'm really not sure why I'm using such a tiny palette knife. I could have used a larger one. It might have been a little easier. One of the other ideas that I had was that I didn't want the stenciling to look perfect, and using the tiny palette knife probably helped me a little bit with that. I wanted the ends of the lines to look a little less perfect, a little bit more irregular, so I'm also trying to achieve that as I go along too. Usually I do my scrapbooking in the evenings or on the weekends. On this particular day, I thought of this idea and then I was compelled to try it out. So I started doing this before I went to work in the morning. And I think that that helped me to just work quickly and try to get it done, because I definitely should not have been doing that. I should have been getting ready for work. Having to rush definitely took out the option for overthinking things, and that probably worked to my advantage. I guess it finally dawned on me that I didn't need to use such a small palette knife on such a large stencil, so I grabbed a larger palette knife that I had in my stash. In the final layout, though, you can see some of the work of the smaller palette knife because I didn't apply the color as evenly with the smaller palette knife, and I like the way that that looked. Sometimes I want to apply the modeling paste or the texture paste perfectly so that it's a very graphic looking background, but in this case I wasn't looking for that look because I wanted there to be variation, since such a large portion of the layout would be covered with this stenciling. That's something that I always keep in mind, whether it's paper or mixed media in a background. Whenever there's a big area of color, I always try to add some variation in that color, even if it's all the same color, just because I think that it's not as interesting to have flat areas of solid color. That's just my way of looking at it. Now it's later in the day and I'm home from work, so I used the stencil and I extended all of those lines right to the very edge. As you could see, the stencil has a border around it, but I didn't want a border on my page, so I just added a little bit more texture paste on the upper right-hand side and the lower left-hand side. I allowed the background to dry thoroughly, and then I began to add some splatters. I wanted to add lots and lots of splatters, and this is just the first round of splatters. So I added the lightest colors like the Think Pink and the Cotton Candy in the upper right-hand corner, and then I proceeded down with Taffy Hour and a Bright Fuchsia until I got to the lower left-hand corner. Adding a lot of splatters helped me to add to that imperfect look that I was going for. I was going to say grungy, but these beautiful bright colors of pink, I don't really think you can call them grungy. They're just too pretty. I also wanted to get a little bit of color on those white areas in between the stripes of pink, just to help further define the areas that have color on them, and then that contrasts with the two corners that have white and almost no color on them. Although a couple of splatters did get over there, but not too many. Now I'm adding some white splatters to the background. To add these white splatters, I'm using a color splash spray called Whites of Their Eyes. And then I also used a color splash spray called Black Hole to add just a few black splatters. I just wanted a little touch of black on the background. I put my background aside to dry, and now I'm working on some of the other elements that I'm going to have on the layout. I'm going to use the picture that you can see on the right-hand side. I cut that down to about 4 by 4 inches, and then I matted it on some white paper. This layout is going to be mainly pink, but I do like to bring in touches of other colors. I love the combination of pink, yellow, and bluish green, so I decided to bring in touches of those other colors. So I'm going to use 2 other colors to matte my photo with to create these pieces of paper that I'm just painting along the edge because I know that I'll only see little bits of these papers. I use 2 shimmers. One is called It's Meant to Be Me. That's the one I'm using now. And the one I used earlier is called Bumbly Bee. I put those 2 papers aside to dry. And then, as I mentioned, I added several rounds of splatters. I'm not going to show you all of that footage because I just continue to do the same thing. I added more splatters to the background just to add a little bit more color. Now the mats are dry, so I'm attaching them down to the photo. I'm offsetting them slightly, so you'll just be able to see a little bit of the blue border on the top of the photo and on the right-hand side, and then the yellow border will be visible on the left-hand side and underneath the photo. I add some ATG adhesive, and then I attach it down to the layout. My title is going to be Love Grows Here. This is one of the die cuts from the kit. I am going to pop it up on some foam, so I attached it down to some thick cardstock. Even though it's a nice weight of paper that the die cuts are printed on, I have a little thing about always wanting to reinforce anything that I pop up on foam on my layout. It's probably not necessary, but it's something that I've grown accustomed to doing. Now I'm going to be adding a number of flowers to the layout. All of these flowers were fussy cut out of one of the pieces of pattern paper from the kit. I had a number of pink flowers left over from the first layout that I made using the February kit. If you'd like to see me paint the flowers, you can watch that on that first video, and I'll put the link in the description box so that you can find it more easily. And then I also had a few white flowers left over. A lot of them were pieces of flowers that were at the edges of the paper, but I found those extremely useful. I was able to paint them with the same shimmers I used on the photo mat. It's called It's Meant to Be Me. I tucked those flowers in with the pink flowers. I painted the centers yellow because I wanted to have more touches of yellow on the layout. It took me a little while to arrange all of the flowers to get them just the way that I wanted them. There was a pink banner with 3 hearts on it, all different colors of pink. I put that underneath the photo. But then I also picked out some other elements that were black and white, and I left them black and white. You could paint them if you wanted to. But I decided to leave them black and white because there's so much color on the background, and I thought some black and white elements would help to break that up. I cut one of the die cut flowers in half, and I worked those 2 halves into the cluster at the top of the photo. Now that I have everything arranged on the layout, I want to start attaching things down. I attached the blue flower in the upper left-hand corner directly down to the page. But for the pink flower, I used some fun foam and I popped up all of the petals, added some ATG adhesive, and then I pressed down on the center so that the petals would pop up just a little bit. I attached down the die cut arrow with the heart on it, and then I also attached down a heart balloon, but I'm going to end up moving that to the right-hand side of the layout a little bit later on. Once I have all of the elements attached down in the upper left-hand corner, I move down to the cluster in the lower left-hand corner around my title. I don't show all of the footage of me gluing everything down and attaching everything down, but as I went along, I added some foam to the backs of some of the flowers to give them a little bit of dimension, and then I did the same thing in the cluster that's above the photo. Despite the fact that I have everything placed down where I want it on the layout, I'm always rearranging and trying out new places for different embellishments on the page. And this process will continue even after I am done with the layout. I'll sometimes switch something around days later. That's why I usually try not to use too much wet glue the first day that I work on a layout, because a lot of times the next day I'll look at the layout and I'll immediately see something that I want to move around. So I try to use ATG adhesive as much as I can, and then later on, if I want to reinforce something, I'll add some wet glue when I'm sure that I'm happy with the layout. Here I'm attaching down the 2 die cuts that I wanted to place underneath the photo. I popped up the heart banner on some foam, and then I had to add a little bit of foam to the bottom of the XOXO so that it would be the same height as the heart banner and then sit properly on the page. I'm adding one of the dots that we receive in the collection to the kit. Dots are really nice because they're about the same size as flare. Remember those flare buttons that were made of metal that were really popular years ago? The dots are light and thin and easy to attach. And they are epoxy, so they're shiny and they are just really nice additions to the page. So I placed the one that says "Made with Love" on top of the photo. I thought it was perfect because it had the heart on it. It goes with the photo, and it's also black and white, so it went right in with all of the other black and white embellishments. So I moved that balloon to the right side of the photo, and then I added another flower in the cluster in the upper left-hand corner. I decided to move half of that black and white flower to the cluster around the title. And then I added some photo corners. I decided to go with some black photo corners, once again to break up all that color that's on the page. I used an EK Success scalloped photo corner punch and some black cardstock to make those. That punch is discontinued, but I often see those punches on eBay if you're interested in grabbing one. I moved that heart embellishment that has the arrow through it to the left-hand side of the photo. I wanted to add something to the centers of some of the flowers, so I found that I had these really pretty and kind of large yellow jewels, so I added those to just a couple of the flowers on the layout. I really like the centers of those flowers, so I didn't want to cover all of them up. I also used some enamel dots. I add them to a number of the embellishments on the page, except for the dot that I put on the balloon. I use all of the smallest dots that I had in my stash. So I put them on the photo corners. I put them on the banner that's underneath the photo. I put one on the arrow that has the heart in it. I put one on the dot that's on top of the photo. And I used a variety of different shades of pink that I had in my stash to go along with all the different shades of pink that I have on the layout. The enamel dots are the final touch that I add to this layout. The layout is complete, and here are some close-ups. As always, thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I really had fun making this layout, especially the background. If you take a look in the description box, you'll find a link to the Shimmerz website where you can purchase one of the color kits. You can also purchase individual paints, and there's a lot more on the website if you would like to check it out. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see everybody again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.